Under Article 1, Cliff and I are going to continue to do a little presentation. Somebody asked me while the other presentation was going on, why are we doing this? I think it's important that the Board of Selectmen let people know early in the process what we're thinking. And we're kicking off a very public process of what our thoughts are, and we're seeking a lot of input. You'll hear that as we go through the slideshow. It won't be a very long slideshow, but it will sort of outline where we are, where we think we'd like to go. It's our proposal, again, as the Board of Selectmen. And we're starting that public process where we want a lot of feedback, a real lot of feedback. So, could you go to the next slide? So, as was mentioned earlier by the MPIC, in 2011, they published a summary report of all of the other reports that had been done for building facility studies. Their number one recommendation was that a professional independent study be done. Walpole, the Board of Selectmen heard that, town meeting heard that. We authorized funding, you authorized funding to go ahead with that study. That study was completed about a year ago, in June of 2013. Their first phase recommendation was that we move ahead with police, council on aging, and fire station. We're going to walk through, there's two other pieces to that, and we'll go through that whole process. Next. I'm going to stand here just so I can glance up at the same time. I think one of the things to note is that some of our buildings are really old. The current police station was built as a town hall in 1881, which is kind of amazing that that building is still in use. It's a very historical building, but it's very outdated for use as a police station. Next slide, please. If you look at this next slide, you'll see a couple of different things. Up on the left-hand corner is the Sally Port. This is where prisoners are brought in. Normally in a modern police station, you drive into the secure area, the gates go down, that protects the public at large, that protects the police. We have a very outdated system. Up on the right-hand side, you'll see a view from the communications room toward the back. On the left-hand side, those iron gates are in fact iron gates, which were cells, way back when. On the left-hand side, you see the communication center itself. Every single piece of equipment in that room, every piece of wire, had not even been thought of or invented back in 1881. So we've sort of crammed the police department, as just an example, into a building that's grossly inadequate for their use. So, Cliff, did you have any comments? I'm sorry. I'm going to make the body of the presentation. Cliff's going to jump in with color at various points, as you know.
And if my blood sugar goes, the color will be red. With respect to this building, we had through Mr. Goba, a couple of years ago, we had the students from the Architectural College come in and take a look at our facilities. And as old as this facility is, one of the unused spaces in the upper loft portion is planned to be rehabbed as available community space. When you see it in the next slide, you'll see part of the architectural structure that can really, really enhance the streetscape of the downtown area.
The next slide is the Council on Aging, and these statistics always kind of blow me away. In 2010, there were 4,960 seniors over the age of 60, and in 2020, the projection is 6,438. Some people would say we don't really need a senior center, what are all those people doing? But it's interesting, when I've traveled, and Cliff has traveled and others have traveled to other towns, they're very vibrant places that attract a lot of people. They help get some of the sick and elderly out of their homes into a common area. They're really vibrant places. We really have a very shabby facility. The town, it was currently built as a school in 1952. It was converted into a town hall, and we've put the Council on Aging into the former cafeteria. You can actually go into the back room and you can see where the trays would stack up and you can slide them along. So, it's just one of those things, when you look at what we have to offer to our elderly and what is offered in other towns, it's quite appalling. So, next slide, please. Fire station was built in 1954 as a combination police station and call fire station. It's been a fire station since 1983. One of the there's a whole myriad of problems with that facility, but one of the biggest ones is we've gone through the process recently of acquiring a new pumper truck. And the modern pumper trucks will not fit in our bays because that building is so old, the equipment has gotten larger, more capable, so we sort of had to down order, to some degree, a truck that would fit into one of the bigger bays. So again, we're forcing the fire department to use a facility that's not modern. I'll say that it's not as bad as the police station, and all of this, you'll all have a chance to do public tours. Part of the process is a big outreach and get people to go look, but it's a very, very outdated building.
One of the most difficult decisions that this body had to make was when we went from the call force essentially to a more permanent type firefighting service. And the reality is that a building that was centrally located for the call firefighters to come to, that became the home, if you will, of the future of firefighting and its changes as it related to EMT solutions, ambulance, if you will, and things of that nature, just absolutely became outdated. And as the force grew, the one thing that remained constant and consistent is having it in a fast response area, which is that downtown.
Next slide, please. Timeline. This is the one that was really interesting to me over the last few months. And I'm not going to read them all. I'm just going to highlight a few. Town Hall, which is currently used as a police station, I mentioned was 1881. The old stone school was on the corner. That was 1885, which is where the new library is. It was then moved, I believe, if I have my history right, down the street. And that original building, you can still see parts of it embedded in a commercial building. Plimpton School was built in 1914, still in use. In the 30s, Blackburn Hall 31, Walpole High School and Boyden School 32. In 52, the New Stone School, which is currently Town Hall, and the cafeteria, as I mentioned earlier, is the Council on Aging. In the 50s, there was a big, late 50s, early 60s, a big building boom. Fisher School in 55, Bird Middle 61, OPR 64, Johnson 66. It's interesting that from 66 on, until we built the library, we hadn't built a new building in town. Now, we did acquire the Elm Street School and do an addition onto that building. But as I'll mention in a minute, we had almost a 50-year gap where we didn't build any buildings. And I think that's important. And the question is, what are we going to do as we go forward? In a town, you want your infrastructure to remain fresh. So periodically, whatever that is, every 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, you should be building a building and doing a major rehab on a building to keep your infrastructure fresh. We had a 50-year gap. So what does that mean to you? What it means is we have a lot of buildings that are nearing the end of their useful lives. Actually, they met the end of their useful life and we reused them. We're putting a lot of money in maintenance, repairs, maybe new windows, maybe a new roof. At some point, we really want to think about, why don't we build something new that will last us for another 50 years? Next slide, please. So I call that the 50-50 problem. 50 to 75 years ago, town meeting at the time, Board of Selectmen, all of the other boards agreed to fund and build almost all the buildings that we have in town. For the last 50 years, we haven't really built anything new. So the question is, in my proposal, and I know Cliff feels very strongly in this, is we should put in place a process to deal with these buildings for the next 50 years. We shouldn't push this down the road 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. We've done that with the police and fire station over and over and over again. We've had proposals, we haven't gone anywhere. We think this is a good proposal. Want to jump in?
Through the generosity of your vote that just took place, one of the major components of this puzzle is now satisfied. With respect to these buildings, one of the things that you have to look at also is as they continue to age well beyond their useful life, our building maintenance people who are extraordinary, and the costs of keeping up with the damages that just the natural environment causes in these buildings can be satisfied. The 50 on the one side of the equation is 50 years of wonderful service that a lot of these buildings gave us, but they are well beyond their useful life. And the other 50 is we won't have to be talking about this at this forum if we get what we think is the best interest of the town of Walpole for the next 50 years. It's a problem solved and a solution found.
Next slide, please. This is just some topics that I'm going to talk about. So this presentation, by the way, will be up on the website probably tomorrow if anybody wants to download and take a look at it. I'm going to run through these kind of quickly. I mean, again, we're just trying to give you an update, a flavor. You can download the presentation. We'll have lots of meetings where we can go in depth into all the buildings. But land preparation, as an example, once we end up with, you know, a completely clean, flat gravel lot, then we'll need to build up from there. So there will be some site work that we'll need to do in preparation for, you know, landscaping, you know, all those kind of things. So I'm just going to run through these quickly. Next slide. This gives you a little. Can you back up one slide? Okay. Go forward. Sorry, I thought there was another slide in there. Next slide. So this is what we talked about earlier. On the left-hand side, that's the west side. That's the old mill building that will be torn down. On the right-hand side are the series of buildings which will be torn down. And the goal is to have that be a flat gravel lot. Next. So on that east side of South Street, the plan is for a police station, a fire station, and then, as was mentioned earlier, some finished work on the parking lot that's across the street, striping, maybe some lighting, whatever it is we feel like needs to be done to make that a safe entry point for people coming to the police station or the senior station. Next slide. That's the view you saw before. I mean, I'm not going to go into it anymore. Next slide, please. Some people are going to say, why are we doing anything with DPW? I think one of the issues to consider is just the timing of all the work. You know, as an example, the police station, the new police station we're proposing would be built on the South Street site. When it's completed, the police station can move out of the current fire station. So the question becomes, what happens to the current firefighters, their equipment, during the transition plan when that current building is torn down and the new building is built? So the idea, the current thinking is to get a dual use. So a 4-bay garage will be built over at the DPW. It's something that will be then used by the DPW when we're done. But it would allow us to transition the fire station within the town, not have to lease property, not have to move them to a part of town where response time isn't as good. It also would help deal with some of the issues that are at the current DPW, a new roof for building number 2, which was on the previous slide. Also renovation of the former vehicle maintenance area, and some drainage and environmental improvements. Next slide. So that just shows number 1 is where the proposed 4-bay garage would go, which would initially be used by the fire department and then by the DPW. Next slide, please. This is an example of the type of building. We're not looking at anything exotic. It's a simple concrete foundation and siding with a steel building. Very economical to operate. And again, this is just a proposal. There's a lot of discussion to go. Next slide, please. People always ask us, well, when you move people around, you never seem to finish off the stuff that needed to be finished off. So to address that issue, as we move the Council on Aging out of the current town hall, the question is, what are we going to do with that space and how are we going to upgrade that space so that it's actually reusable? So the current plan is to have the Council on Aging space become the new main meeting room, do some rehab work on the old main meeting room, including upgrading the heating and air conditioning system, and make that conference room space. As you know, on a lot of nights, all the conference rooms, including the library, are booked solid. So, you know, again, it's a proposal, open to a lot of discussion. Next, please. Fire station. Use the current footprint. Go to the next slide, please. This is where Cliff will probably want to jump in for a minute, but this is combining a new fire station, apparatus bay garages, with the current police station to take advantage of that historic building and open up on the third floor that auditorium-like space for use. Nobody can really get there anymore. It's not really used. It's hidden away. Did you want to say anything else, Cliff?
Architecturally speaking, it keeps the 1880s building in its structure. We know, based on the historic building concept, that we can do the inside development the way it needs to be done. And architecturally, as you can see, as you extend it along the streetscape along the street, it's just an absolutely building that is just pristine and looks wonderful and extraordinarily efficient, which is what you really care about.
Next slide, please. Sorry, I jumped ahead earlier and talked about the wrong slide, but this is the slide on the town hall renovations when the Council on Aging moves out. Next slide. Timeline. I mean, we're kicking it off now. We're still working on the legal issues for South Street, as we talked about, to get that finished out. We're starting our outreach process. You can sort of look at an early cut at what will happen when. And again, it's a phase type project because you need to build the Council on Aging and then the police station, move them over, and then you can get started on the fire station. So it's a timing issue. Is this exactly how it would work out once the architects look at it in great detail? I don't know. But this is a plan that is certainly viable at this point. Next slide, please. Costs. These are some numbers that the Board of Selectmen did vote last week. It's essentially, we voted, the McGuire estimates came in, which is the column on the left. We've made some changes to that. We've Walpoleized it, as I would call it, cut down on some things. Again, until you get into the real details, you won't know exactly, but this is a good ballpark. So in total, we're looking at a project of about $31.8 million. We have some money that we've talked about several times at the Board of Selectmen level. That's, you can think of it as one-time money or money that was turned back that would like to apply to this project. It's a way to complete the project without hitting the taxpayer, with a double whammy right between the eyes. So the net project, as we're looking at it right now, is a debt exclusion somewhere in the neighborhood of $21 million. Next slide, please. So with the average value of a home at about $406,000, borrow for 20 years, we're projecting a 5% bond rate, use of the one-time money, and use of our existing debt capacity. Next slide, please. This is just one example of a spreadsheet cut at what would it look like in the first year. And we're looking at a first year worst case number based on the current plan of an increase over your fiscal year 14 taxes of about $159. And again, how the details flow in, how the project gets staged can affect, and then the debt would be dropping down after that. Next slide, please. Next slide. We're starting off this process tonight with an Article 1 update. I think it's important that you, as thought leaders in the town, get to start thinking about this. We're about to kick off very soon some input sessions with the community. We'll hold some public hearings. We're also planning to go around and visit many, many groups in town. So you'll see and hear about meetings popping up, in the library in East Walpole, over here, over there. We really want to get out and get a chance to talk to people about the proposal and see what they think. Let's hear from them. I think it was Mr. Guyette mentioned earlier, we might be moving too fast. That's a possibility. So we want to hear that from people. We want to hear what they're thinking about. We're also going to meet with all the town committees that are affected by a new building proposal. We're going to host a series of, public workshops in addition to sort of the outreach sessions. And we're going to schedule facility tours for the public, the boards, and committees. I think it is important that people go see these buildings. I know FinCom sees these buildings as an example almost every year. They go look at all the buildings. They've been there many times. They know what they're seeing. But I think a lot of other people have never really had the chance to go into the police station, see what it really looks like, fire station, council on aging during the day when it's active and, there's no space for additional people to sit down. Next slide, please. We're also going to start a similar process for town employees and departments. We think it's important to go through those same steps. We'd like to know what they think of the concept, what the issues are from their point of view, identify and resolve concerns. When you think about a new building and you're going to work in it, you want to make sure it's the most functional it can be for whatever tasks that you are performing. So we really want to pull that information out of the people who do those tasks every day, that really do understand the job they have to do. I can guess, some architects can guess, but it's good to find out what they really do and what they'd really like to do to be more efficient. And at the bottom, kind of an idea, we'll ask all the departments to prepare sort of a sheet, what's the history of your building and your use, what's the good, what's the bad, what are the issues. So we'd really like to get down to that level so the departments, the department heads, the people that are going to use these buildings, working with the architects, get a chance to really build a building that will be functional for us. Again, I look at this as a 50-year solution for 50 years. We don't want to build something that's, defunct in 10 years or 20 years. We really do want to solve this problem for the future. Next slide, please. As of right now, I would say our plan, and again, we haven't heard from the general public at large, but if it was up to me right now, in the Board of Selectmen, we would plan to come back and present at town meeting. We would have gone through that exhaustive process. We'd be looking for a November debt exclusion question. And sometime before August 6th, we would have to go as a Board of Selectmen to the Secretary of State to request that be on the ballot. So we're sort of putting it all out here. You can start to think about it. You can start to think about what the issues are. We really do want feedback. We'll publish. I think John has most of your email addresses. We'll make sure that the RTM email list gets hit as we start the process going around, because I think we can find the best solution if all of you get involved and help us do that. And that's what I would ask that you do. Cliff, any final comments?
Your Board of Selectmen are 5 unique individuals with varied backgrounds. The one thing we are united in, we did cost-benefit analyses on this particular program, and we're excited about solving the 50-year problems with a 50-year solution. And we appreciate your time. Thank you.
I agree with Cliff. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Snuffer. Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. The time being approximately 9:10, I propose we take a short break. And a couple things as you're...